Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Aina Podcasts. In this episode, we are talking to Ria about this exciting and emerging space called philosophy with children. We talk about a bunch of things. We talk about how Ria got interested in this work, the kinds of philosophical questions that children ask, how to facilitate sessions with children, and the general implications of this work in our larger education culture. It was a very enjoyable conversation for me. I hope you enjoy it too. Listen in and subscribe for more. Hi Ria, how are you
Hello.
doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So it's great to have you on the podcast and really excited to talk about a lot of things. So, can we start with an introduction? Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So I'm Ria and I'm currently based in Chennai. And for several years now, I've been a practitioner of philosophy with children. We have a center here, which is called a Room of Children's Philosophies, where we engage with children's literature and young people. And we also engage in online courses for teachers across the country. And now there are some from outside the country as well. Yeah, I'm also in the process of curating a children's exhibition with the German Institute in Chennai. So, yeah, all things to do with literature, philosophy, and children is what I'm all about.
Okay, that's really exciting, and we'll talk a lot more about philosophy with children in a bit. But
Yeah.
would love to know, like, how did you get interested in this? So, just in a nutshell, if you could tell us some of the major influences or experiences or moments that made you kind of move into this.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me this question. And usually, this is a very long answer for me because doing philosophy means I'm always reflecting on how did this begin and where did this begin and why did this begin. So I do think that from when I was very young, my teachers and my parents and people around me did tell me that I used to love to ask questions. And I always remember there was one of my teachers who also said that there was a rule in the class that I could only ask three questions. And she didn't mean to like stifle me, but I think that she did want me to encourage, she was trying to encourage me to also think more before I ask a question. So I do think that like just there was something that was a propensity from when I was a child. My father also definitely played a role because I remember that when I was quite young, he started asking questions like, how do you know when you go from like having a desire to when it becomes greed? So he
Mm-hmm.
did ask these kinds of questions. So these, I think these just ideas played a part, and clearly it's taken me a long way because I did want to like continue doing this. Um, I think I was disillusioned after my schooling, and I didn't know what to do with my life. And I did go to a liberal arts university where I had the chance to discover philosophy as a discipline as well. And thankfully, it was done in a way where I mean, I had professors who, were making it about like asking questions, making sense of yourself, making sense of the world. Yeah, and really, like, it was joyful to be able to question so many things that when we were younger, we could just not question. And the process was interesting because usually philosophy is just looked at as like this intellectual endeavor that is only available to the elite. And although the university was definitely that way, I would say that it still moved me to want to live based on those ideas. Like I didn't think it felt like just as like just a head activity. It felt like it could lead to more awareness, it could lead to more compassion. Like it felt like a philosophy of like action and being, and not just philosophy as a way of thinking. I mean, that's how I took it. And yeah, my journey also involved wanting to be in education from a young age. I was working with children from when I turned 18, actually. And then when I was working with children, I realized that they were asking questions. They had this ethical self, they had this existential self. And most of the time, I saw all of us as adults being quite stumped. Like either we would dismiss it or we would, give the answer. And it was like barely an exploration of these questions that are very central to who we are. And yeah, so that I mean, when I was finishing my undergrad, I thought I was having this novel idea of like, oh, what if we did philosophy with children? And then I landed up Googling it and I realized it's a whole educational movement happening all over the world. So yeah, my journey took me to enrolling, I mean, like downloading first a lot of books and reading it and figuring out, like learning from it, but also like learning from organizations elsewhere. So one of my mentors runs an organization in the US called Plato. They offer a lot of courses for people in India as well. Another mentor is in Brazil, Walter Kohan. So I think I also started learning and then going to schools in India and asking, can I do philosophy with children? And that took me to Sholay School.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot that happened after that,
Yeah.
but I'm going to stop now.
No, but that was also very vivid. I mean, it was really good to listen to all the bits that went into it, and at the heart of it, what I sensed was this idea of asking questions, and again, like something that we do associate with children quite a bit. But we sort of, I suppose, don't think of it as a philosophical endeavor. And then, of course, comes the next bit about how do we sort of think of it pedagogically, and how do we do philosophy with children. So it would be now good to sort of maybe, understand what this term means, right? And you were talking about also studying about it and understanding it exists as a discourse already. Now, the sense I got is that there is something called philosophy for children, right? And the term that you are using is philosophy with children. So I'm guessing there's also a conceptual distinction that is deliberate there. So if you can first tell us what is this discourse called philosophy for children that exists already, and how are you kind of adding to it, positioning yourself within that?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that distinction because even within the discourse, there's been this movement from philosophy for children to philosophy with children to philosophy of children to children for philosophy, which is like my favorite. But, there's been, what does it mean to place philosophy before children and children before philosophy, which I think I'll say more in a bit. But yeah, maybe I should just introduce some of the ideas
Yes.
first.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the larger movement, which is credited a lot to the 1970s and couple of thinkers, but I do think it goes way back, is the idea that so there's philosophical inquiry and there's philosophical dialogue, but the idea is that we ask questions, and if we respond and pay attention to these questions, we will notice that these questions are also of three kinds. So one is that these questions are contested, not answerable. So usually we think that children are only asking concrete questions about the physical world, but they are extremely imaginative children. So they also are constantly asking, as soon as you say it's not okay to lie, right? They're like, why is it not okay to lie? If you say this is the right thing or the wrong thing, why is this the right thing or the wrong thing? If you say, you should share things with your siblings because that's the fair thing, they will be like, what is fairness? Like, so it is. So the idea is that there's so many conceptual questions that are actually pretty open-ended and contested and not answerable. So can we pay attention to children hearing? I mean, can we pay attention to how children ask these questions? So that's one. The second is that from a young age, we ask questions that are considered perennial, right? So we have asked these questions over time and we will keep asking these questions. So for instance, what happens after death? Is there God? And there has been a lot of empirical study to also show that from a very young age, one of the first few questions that young children ask are questions on death, God, and gender actually. So it's very interesting how that's one of the first few ideas that they kind of soak in and that they observe and that maybe shocks them and they ask about it. Yeah, and the other thing is that usually philosophy is looked at as this abstract idea, but in philosophy with children and children with philosophy, we look at the questions as just everyday questions. So tomorrow I'm going to vote. Who should I vote for? In school, children have to vote. Who should they vote for? Who makes a good leader? So, it's what makes a good friendship. So things that are actually a part of their everyday life, but they are perennial questions that we have kept asking, and they're also contestable questions. So this is this is what we mean by philosophical question very broadly.
Okay.
And we try to pay attention to this.
Okay. So can I ask a quick follow-up question here?
Yes.
So just to like define this even, more clearly, what do we mean by philosophy here? Like, why are we calling it philosophy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big one. So I think we are calling it philosophy because they are those questions that are part of all the disciplines, right? So just how we have philosophy of math and philosophy of science and philosophy of history, they are sort of the fundamental questions where, we also hit a dead end, where we might see assumptions. So the nature of these questions are such that I would say they are cross-discipline, and they don't use the same approach as a history or a science. So I have to use a very different kind of approach to a philosophical question. And there are different approaches, but it's a kind of mixing. Sometimes it's empirical, sometimes it's just what if and hypothetical.
Yeah.
And I think it's philosophy because it's thinking about our thoughts. One. So it's what are the fundamental questions? What are the assumptions? Why do we think the way we think in any aspect of our life? So that's one thing that makes it philosophical. The second thing is I can't just answer it by saying that take 10 steps. There are very many perspectives in any of these questions, and it requires a combination of various things to be able to think about these questions. And it varies based on the question. So what happens after death? There'll be a completely different story we'll read and a different approach to, is there someone like God or is there something like God? So it's also that, if that's making sense.
Yeah, and in that we can say that children will be asking both philosophical questions as well as questions that are not philosophical, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So definitely they ask questions, and there are both kinds. And I don't think it's fair to constantly also make a non-philosophical question into a philosophical question, because if they're just asking, I don't know if I'm full or not, and then I make it a question about greed, then that might be a little like a stretch. So it's not about acknowledging that everything is philosophy. It's not that. Yeah.
Okay. And so what happens when we say we are doing philosophy with children as opposed to philosophy for children?
Okay, yeah. So philosophy for children, so when we say philosophy for children, it's usually we might want to take big ideas from the history of philosophy. And there's a lot of writers who write in a, young people or child-friendly manner. So typically it's that, okay, there are like there's wisdom, or there is like great ideas within philosophy. Let's take it to children. So I look at philosophy for children in that way. But philosophy with children is, I might still share big ideas, but how do I engage with children and philosophize with them? So let's take a question. What are our perspectives? What are our assumptions? What are the implications? What are our reasons? So if I'm actually doing the philosophizing, then I think we look at it as philosophy with children.
Okay.
But of course, you can still do philosophy with children when you take philosophy for children, and you can also take philosophy for children while philosophizing with them. It's not binding, like it's not like mutually exclusive.
So,
Yeah.
and also when we are thinking of children here, you have an age range in mind?
So, in the field as such, people have started as young as 4, 5, 6, depending on, which geographic contextual part of the world they are in. So when I have done philosophy with children, it has been a lot with 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age. But generally, philosophy with children has actually been like a pedagogy, which has also been used with adults. So it's very interesting that it's philosophy with children, but the pedagogy has become so powerful that it's like philosophy for children or philosophy with children for all. Because the whole idea is to not just pass on ideas, but to get people think together, have dialogue, which is the facilitation part, which I think we'll go into soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to answer your question very briefly, when they say children, I think there's no specific age group that is attached to it. Of course, now we know that for a very young child of 4 and 5, if they don't have access to language and they can't express themselves, this becomes a bit more difficult. But there has been a big pushback of philosophy with children to a lot of like ideas in child psychology and in developmental psychology, where there is a long-standing idea that children don't have the ability to abstract. So I think people in the field have noticed that children do laugh when there's an ironic situation. Like they are abstracting, even though they don't know the word for it. Like, and we have a lot of books where there's a lot of irony, and children immediately can pick up on it. But of course, like you cannot like stamp it saying if it's this age group, because as we know, like age cannot say too much, because different age groups of children in different parts of the world have a very different childhood. So I think that, yeah, that's just to say that, we are a little bit nervous about like saying which age it's appropriate for, because there's been a pushback against that. Like, yeah.
So I have a couple of follow-up sort of questions here, but I'll ask the first one.
Yeah.
So I want to also understand, because you did mention context here, right? I mean, one that how philosophy for children or with children is being sort of actualized or applied would differ from context to context, right? Then how we think of the childhood, children is also kind of changing across contexts.
Yeah.
So how do you think of, let's say, sort of contextualizing this within, let's say, the spaces you have been working in? Because, I mean, also the literature, it seemed that you sort of were referring to, is coming primarily from Western context, right? So how did you think of then that translation or the contextualization?
So, a lot of philosophy with children is also done through like activities and games besides stories. I have relied a lot on stories, and what I have noticed about like the texture of like children's literature, where they have that philosophical potential, is that across the globe, they are done in a way that, children can relate to it in different parts of the world. So, like, this is to say that I think there is something really beautiful about children's literature that I categorize as philosophical, because they don't give us too much about like that they will not mention that this is like by the Ganga, or they might not mention that this is happening by the Nile, and this there can be strong arguments that, oh, but does this mean that this is like does not have context? But the whole idea is that then this story becomes relatable for a child, even sitting in like Gudalur, for instance. So, and I've seen that. I feel like there are certain picture books that they are written and illustrated in such a way that you don't get caught up in the context, and you're able to go to the heart of a question of like, why am I here? Right? Like, is there a reason? Is there something like fate that has made me come here, which a child can ask anywhere, a person can ask anywhere, and we don't have to get caught into the details of where is the space and place and time that this is happening. So I think the art of this has also been in selecting the kinds of stories and books that can work across context. And I'm not saying that this happens everywhere. I think over years, I have figured out how to curate the kinds of stories that would work for children who come from different backgrounds. Of course, now language, I feel, is the biggest like challenge. Because most recently, when I was at the International Youth Library, where I got to find stories that were also Japanese authors and Korean authors that were really philosophical, so not just like, from the quote unquote West. And we've translated it to English, but then, of course, in a place like India, like it has to go through a lot more translations to then be accessible to different contexts. So I think that part of it, the language part of it, which is how then becomes a big part in philosophizing, is where there's a barrier and challenge. But I think just the story itself, there are too many. I mean, like, I have to start giving examples to tell you how like it works, and there's a lot of like animals used as metaphors of the human condition. in these stories. So there's and we've also noticed that there's eggs. That every philosophically rich stories has an egg somewhere. So like these kinds of things. So they're quarreling about egg, or they're naming a crocodile egg as a chicken egg and raising all these questions of how do we come to know. So it's very, it's a whole different genre in some ways. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
No, I think there are two things that I'm thinking. Like one is that when we talk about a philosophical question or philosophizing, in a way, it is sort of not necessarily reduced only to the context, right? It's a question that sort of is abstracted from context too, right? And I think that's an interesting idea. So in that sense, you can do philosophy with different sets of people. So the whole question of like, how do we think of God, right, is a question that can be kind of, in a sense, democratically sort of explored with sort of different communities. But I suppose the difference would be that the kinds of answers or the ways in which people think, right, would be somewhat shaped, by their milieu, by where they're coming from.
Correct.
And also by the languages in which they're thinking, right? And the other thing I'm thinking is that, like, when we talk about doing philosophy in different languages, right? I mean, of course, like you can formulate a question and a similar question, across languages. I mean, that is pretty obvious. But I'm just thinking, like, language also is carrying particular, I don't know, tropes of thinking, particular idioms or templates of thinking, particular kinds of cultural consciousness. And in what ways do they shape the kinds of questions people are asking, and the values with which people are asking questions, especially, let's say, questions of morality, right? And I've found that, based on, let's say, your kind of cultural context, you approach those questions differently, right? So,
I wanted to just go back to your previous question a little bit, because so what we have realized is that the stories itself is that we pick us such that they can be relatable to, because even in the same space and place, there's so many contexts, right? So even when we say context, like there is like even like gender and caste and class and mixed background and literacy, all of these are contexts. So it's the beauty of doing philosophy with these stories is that we want it to be appealing as a story so that it provokes the child, to share from their experience. So where the contexts come in philosophy with children is a little different than like how we think about literacy, because the context comes in that when the young person responds, they are first going to respond from their experience. And so when they're thinking about a question like, why am I here? The character in the story is doing this imaginative journey of imagining that, okay, what if I'm born in the middle of a forest, and what would my life be like, and asking questions about that. What if I'm born on a boat and I'm just traveling, all like, I'm just on the move. Like, what if I'm born in war? So like that, then the first thing you will ask the child to do is like draw and a picture of a situation that they've never inhabited, but they have wondered what it would be like for that person, for that situation, for that place. So the context comes in because in the philosophizing, they first bring their context. And then we'll go into a bigger question saying, okay, since you've imagined this situation, we can't answer, right? Like what it would be like for a person in war if we've never been in war, suppose. But then that goes to the question of, okay, then do you think there's a further reason for why you were born here and now and not there and then? So it's always from their context that we slowly build up to a larger, like a more quote unquote abstract question. So that's where I think we don't look for like context in the story or the prompt, because we look for context that comes from the beings in the room.
Okay. So I think now we can also, now that we have, I think, established some context for what philosophy with children is, what does it really look like in practice? Right? So like the question of pedagogy, the question of how do you exactly do it through activities. So could you draw a picture for us? Like, just like, so you do workshops, you do a course, right? But so if we are thinking of doing, let's say, a session with children, right?
Yeah.
What would it look like? What would happen in that space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first, I thought, let me just tell you a little bit about. I think we spoke a lot about inquiry and what counts as a philosophical question, but I didn't get to say much about the philosophy toolkit and philosophical dialogue. So I'll just quickly a little bit on
Yeah.
those and then go into what does the classroom look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what one of the bigger things of philosophy with children is that we're philosophizing with the children. So we want them to get their questions, their experiences, their ideas, and then really think along with others about those ideas. So we use a philosophy toolkit in that there's a lot of different parts of it. So sometimes, as I just mentioned, we ask them, are you assuming, do you agree, disagree, what are your reasons, can you think of a valid example, what if this was the case, what are the implications. We ask them to define the terms they're using, because often that's itself a philosophical endeavor of how they're defining. We look for analogies. So there's a lot of different moves that the facilitator has to learn. For once the children start sharing, how can we actually take this deeper and deeper? So that's part of a philosophy toolkit, which I just very briefly shared. And then the idea is to not for the facilitator to try to reach any one answer. So I think it's like a very, very big part of it is to not be like, I know the right answer and I'm trying to nudge children to think of fairness in this way or to think of God in this way, which is what makes this whole thing extremely risky, and which is why like it's very difficult to make this a top-down approach at all. Because if I'm not aware of like my biases and I don't put that in front of the students more openly, then it's not like it can taint this whole philosophical process in some ways. So yeah, it's not a debate. We're not trying to like see who has the best idea. We're not trying to reach one response and like one answer at the end of it. And I'm trying to like model thinking so that children also are picking up this way of thinking. And what's really daunting and great about doing philosophy with children as an adult is that I also have to be humbled by the fact that I don't have the answers to these questions. And most of us as adults also are still wondering about these questions. And maybe we can come into this space as co-inquirers rather than being the, answer giver. So during the dialogue, we focus on various other dispositions because it's also, as much as I'm sharing, it's about listening to each other, disagreeing, self-correcting, keeping space for silences, like noticing whose voice is missing, which perspective is missing, and like not rushing the process. Sometimes we might enter a dialogue and we might come up with more questions, and sometimes that's okay. So it looks very different because it's like free play, but with ideas in some ways. And people like usually when adults first see it, they're like, what was your takeaway? And like sometimes the takeaway is that we've just thought through this, like we've gone from several of our confusions to clarity, and we have a new idea about this. So yeah, that's like a lot of. Yeah,
So like how do you, for example, like begin, like do you sort of, so and what are the materials you would use, right? So let's say you are working with a set of children. I'm assuming that they are between 7 and 10, let's say. And you work with some material, some books based on which questions are asked, or is there a theme that you work with? And then is it just talking and dialogue, or do people, because it's also about children doing philosophy, so are they also doing other things? Are they drawing? Are they using their senses and so on?
Yeah. So it fully depends on the prompt. So they definitely do drawing when, like this imagination prompt I said, they will draw situations that they've not inhabited, but they've imagined, right? So sometimes it's drawing, sometimes it's moving around. But again, to go back to your first thing, so what we do is we enter the space, and initially we decide if it's a new space, a new group of children, we'll decide a few kinds of stories and questions. And then as they get a hang of what is a philosophical question, then they tell me, we want to talk about friendship. Can you bring a prompt got to do with it? So then it starts getting molded beforehand based on the questions that they are curious about. So what we go in and we read a book. So I'll give you an example of a session from this morning that I did with sixth graders of Chirag School, which is in Uttarakhand, and they have just begun this process. So today was the second session, and the story we read was Our John, where it's a bunch of birds that find an egg and they're trying to decide who should this egg belong to, and they start quarreling. So what we would do pedagogically is we'll read half the story and we'll stop at that point where they're quarreling, and then I will give a couple of options, right? Do you think that this egg should belong to all of them? It should belong to none of them? It should belong to who found it first, because the duck found it first and laid claim to it? Or do you think it belong to only its own species? And what was very interesting is that there were only 10 students in the class, and they had filled up all the, like they had responses to all four categories. So some said that it should belong to none because they're fighting. Some said it should belong to all because then they'll get to learn so many different things from all the birds. Some said that, it should only belong to its own species because then only it'll be understood. Otherwise, it'll be forced to do things it doesn't want to do. There might be like danger of belonging to species not of your own. And then some people said that, duck found it first, so it should go to duck. So then what we do is we first gather these perspectives. Then what we do is we finish reading the story in this case. Okay, so we realize that it's actually a crocodile that has come out of the egg. It's actually not even a bird species. And then we let them revisit. So some of them will end up being like, okay, I thought it should belong to everyone, but now I have changed my perspective. So we give them space to change their perspectives, change their reasons, and then we go into few reasons, right? So a lot of them felt that they cannot be belonging between two different species. And the first thing I asked was, okay, how many of you have pets? And they all were like, we all have pets. So then I was like, okay, so wait a minute. Does this mean that you don't belong to your pets and your pets can't belong to you? And they were all stumped because in the story, they felt that the egg should only belong to whichever species it's from. And then it became a question of, okay, so if there is belonging between species, what has to be there? So one child suggested that there has to be a shared language. Like if there's no shared language, they can't be belonging. So then we try to understand why is that the case. Then we try to understand, okay, if there has to be belonging, what can't be there? And then one person suggested that you cannot, like, if I'm forcing my dog, right? If I'm just trying to make my dog how I think of my dog, then maybe there's something that's not very belonging in this relationship, So it's just one example, but like that's what we do. We use the prompt as a way to provoke perspective, to provoke questions, to provoke reasoning. And then once they've shared their initial perspectives and reasons, we start relating it to larger questions.
Okay.
If that's helping at all.
Yeah, definitely. No, it is. It is. I have like two questions there, like, and these are interlinked questions. So one, like, I got a sense of what the children are doing, right? And they are, and how the dialogue is sort of moving, through the sort of back and forth. Now, one is like, what happens through this? Like, if you had to kind of gauge, having done sessions, with children for a while now, what do you think happens through it? How do they respond? How do they give any feedback on this, if at all, right? This is linked to like a bigger question that if, let's say, from an institutional point of view, somebody asks that why is this important, right? How do we justify something like this, an exercise like this?
Yeah. So there has been a lot of different feedback that has come over the years, definitely. I'll mention some of them and then go to your larger question of why should we care about this, right? From an institutional perspective. So sometimes, like one of the first things that I remember hearing is that, like a child had said, this is the first time I'm becoming aware of how I think. So I think what the first thing they realize, even in this process that I mentioned, that they didn't know that they think about belonging in this way, but actually in their life they're living it very differently. And so it makes you also think about like, okay, I didn't even know that these are my thoughts and this is my reasoning and these are my ideas. So I think the first thing is like, and that they become aware. Then sometimes we've got this feedback that the more I think about it, the more interesting it becomes. So I think that to also first become aware of your ideas and then find your ideas as something that's not just uh, that's something that's passed on by others, but to be interested in your own thinking is, I think, very valuable, because often children feel that, I like, I'm somebody's thinking for me and somebody's telling me how to think, and I don't know whether my thoughts are interesting. And you can see that gendered playing out in the classroom also from a very young age, where a lot of the young boys who I've worked with have been a lot more confident with their perspectives. And a lot of the young girls have always been a bit more nervous that I don't know if I'm thinking, right, and I don't know if I'm thinking interestingly. And so it's to also get them to see their own thinking as valuable. And one of the things is, like, they mentioned that, I'm glad I get to discuss things that no one, really opens up a door to talk about, because I think a lot of these questions don't get a space like in their other subjects within the timetable, right? And sometimes their response is just that it's fun to, like, like be aware of how we think and ask questions and wonder and change our views. And yeah, so this is a little bit about like what young people
Yeah.
have said, but I think to go to the larger question of why should we care about it, I think that there's been a lot of philosophers of education who have spoken about, like you mentioned, right? Like, what does it mean to democratize the classroom, to hold space for differences, different points of views. And a lot of philosophers of education have also spoken about like how, like whether it's a Freire or a J. Krishnamurti or whoever, they've spoken about how it's important to know ourselves, right? It's important to discuss our ideas and rethink our ideas. And I don't know a better space than philosophy with children for that, for young people. Because in the end of the day, like, you can't blame a teacher who has another curriculum in their hand to not feel the pressure of completing that. So to like the value of like seeing that this, I have found this to be the pedagogy that's been most valuable to actually think of like democratic learning. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
to develop our ideas, and of course, there are more concrete things that, the field has shown that this has helped children become confident thinkers, become more open-minded, articulate their thoughts. And then this flipped question, right, where a lot of people have written why children should not be left out of the field of discipline. Just as at one point, I mean, just they should not be left out of the discipline of philosophy. Just as like women were once left out, they are like, okay, children are so playful and imaginative and not jaded that their perspectives can also contribute to philosophy if we don't want to be so closed,
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. No, I think there is also another education justification, like in an educational culture where asking questions is a central problem. It's one of our
yeah,
central kind of pedagogic problems that, oh, people don't ask questions. And, whatever, there's fear-based pedagogy, there's rote learning. And how do you create that space for, asking questions, generating thought, generating inquiry through which sort of you discover
yeah,
your ways of thinking, but also you are kind of interacting with knowledge, right? So I think
yeah,
that's a powerful mode in which you can do it. I also had a couple of other thoughts. One is that, what you said, that you can't expect, a teacher in, teaching a regular subject or a discipline, to be doing this because they unfortunately often they have to complete the syllabus. However, I think it's important that the frame of doing philosophy, asking questions, generating inquiry, is something that sort of uh, is something that kind of is carried across subjects and across
yeah,
pedagogies, right? And there's an
yeah,
importance for, of teachers across disciplines to engage with a field like this. And I'm not saying it has to be philosophy with children, but
Yeah.
just the idea that, okay, how do we facilitate in a way that we are able to build dialogue, where we are
Yeah.
able to ask questions, and where we
Yeah.
are not necessarily trying to arrive at some sort of a
Yeah.
determinate answer, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
of course, there are better answers,
Yeah.
often, but
Yeah.
the idea for just developing an inquiry, I think that's something that can be
Yeah.
like a larger pedagogic sort of
Correct.
desire and goal. Yeah.
So that has been a challenge. Like, I feel that with all the work we have done and just given how adults get conditioned with time, and this, I'm not saying I'm rid of this. Like, this is
Mm.
definitely something which is the most challenging thing, even for me in a classroom,
Mm-hmm.
is not rush it. Like, I think the biggest thing is that if this inquiry and dialogue and ideas is made into a rushed process, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's lost. And I think the biggest difficulty for education and schools and teachers is constantly like this, we are chasing after something and we're in a rush, and it's like saying a child who's doing free play, if I
Mm-hmm.
go and like be like, now rush your free play, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
this counterintuitive to be like you're playing but play fast,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think that has been like a challenge to just get everyone to slow down in this space.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. There's our mentor Walter Cohen, when he came and did a workshop for adults. The first 3 hours of the workshop in Bangalore, he just told them to ask, like, write down their questions, and people had to respond to questions with questions. And it
Mm-hmm.
was so difficult for people to not answer those questions and to actually just think
Yeah.
about questions as answers,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
that mindset shift itself, was like it was uncomfortable for people for in that first 3 hours.
Yeah.
That biology workshop where we are asking questions and responding with questions,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, yeah,
there's also the sort of this kind of like this logic of infantilizing the student that operates even in higher education, right? Where,
yeah,
I mean, with children, you feel like that's a legitimate or, way of like being with children. Okay, I know better, children know less, I have to teach the child, which I disagree with.
yeah,
And of course, that also requires a kind of mindset shift that where, okay, how do you think of the child as equal, as also capable of complex thought, of all kinds of questions, and who will generate things that you will learn from as a much older person. But I think that same frame of thinking is applicable across contexts. So I feel even if you're teaching in higher ed, uh, it's so essential to resist that impulse to infantilize. I mean, I get very
yeah,
bothered when a lot of, let's say somebody in their early 20s who's just started teaching is referring to students maybe 2 years younger than them as kids, right?
mm,
And why is it that we do it so unconsciously? Oh, the kids
yeah,
are doing this, our kids are doing this, they don't know
yeah,
better, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a huge element of philosophy with children. Just like to put in like a theory thing
Mm-hmm.
there, there's a whole thing of like epistemic injustice
Mm-hmm.
that they've spoken about, and how philosophy with children was supposed to address this epistemic injustice, which is that children experience less, so they know less, so
Mm-hmm.
they can think less, so they can act less. Like this whole idea that, and it flipped that on its head, because the whole idea was that, but children experience. If
Mm-hmm.
you experience, you can have thought. If you have thought, you can reflect on your thought. So
Mm-hmm.
it kept on being like at different stages of our life, our philosophical thinking changes based on our experiences,
Yeah.
which means that even when you're young and you're experiencing, you have certain philosophical standpoints
Yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
you can nurture,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, like I'm also curious, like, do you think of philosophy with children as a political practice? Like, how do you sort of think of questions around equity, justice, inclusion? Uh, I mean,
Yeah.
within the critical, I mean, you mentioned Freire, and within the critical pedagogy tradition, of course, asking the question is linked to really understanding your structural conditions and
Yeah.
beginning to, move towards sort of more liberatory possibilities. Now, of course,
Yeah.
with children, this changes. It also depends on which children you are sort of working with, what are their social locations. But
Yeah.
how do you think of like ethical and political aspects of this work.
Yeah. So do you mean that like what kind of prompts do we do? Do we have those prompts, or do you mean what are the implications? So I mean, to answer the first part of the question, we have actually a lot of our philosophy with children does happen on questions like what do we mean by fairness? What do we mean by not so much justice, I think, but I think a lot of fairness, a lot of equality. And there's a lot of stories that we have selected that also asks critical questions of like societal structures and norms, right? So like, and it is one of the hardest philosophical explorations, because often young people also will be like, okay, I'm a girl because I'm a girl, like, so it is to go from what is your experiences of these societal realities and structures to ask philosophical questions of like why are they here, and to go into questions of power is definitely something we try to do, but it is a bit more, it is more challenging,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
But
yeah.
because to get them to think about power, they get it in a child adult dynamic, they get it, it's the easiest, for them to like locate power in that, but to locate how power plays out in caste and in gender and in class, I've seen they have to be a little older. Like I do feel like, but of course we have picture books, as you know, like there are picture books on these questions across the board. We have to do the task of making it more open ended, because a lot of them are then about like what are the social realities, what are the experiences, how is discrimination working. But from that we do want to ask bigger questions of, okay, so what do you think, what should we do, right? Like how do we, is this inevitable, all of these kinds of questions are like questions that we then go into also. um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to come back to one of the first things that you said, which is about your work and how you are now you have a center and you are also building it. So would you like to talk about the work that you're just doing
Yeah.
right now and that you're building,
Yeah.
and as well as, I mean, if you had to now project into the future a little and
Yeah.
sort of talk about, okay, what are the different ways in which this work can be expanded?
Yeah.
What are some ideas and forms? So if you can talk about both of these things.
Yeah. So, I know I called it center, you call it center, but it's like a room. It's room for like 15 students at once, and currently at like what we have so far. And it's great because I think in philosophy, children small is big. Definitely, like, we can't do this dialogue. And that has also been one of the bigger challenges with schools, if you want to take it, where they have like 50 students or 40 students. How does this pedagogy work, right? How do you get everyone to feel like they have a voice? How do you get them to feel like everyone is capable of knowledge production and you just don't have to feel like you are just passively receiving? It is difficult when it becomes a numbers game. So we are a small space in a room. But going back to your the other question of how do we plan to grow it? So yeah, what we definitely do is that there are yearly or like maybe even twice a year, we do long-term courses for educators where it's very hands-on, because we actually walk them through what is a prompt, like you were asking, right? What are the different kinds of prompts? Take it to your classroom. Here are some facilitation moves once children start responding, because what's most difficult is, okay, now they're sharing their ideas. What do I do, right? Like, so we do courses on like facilitating and theory and practice of philosophy of children. Currently there's a course that we are halfway through, which is on philosophical children's literature, because there's been a lot of work in this field also, like what do we
Yeah.
mean by philosophical children's literature, what are the devices, how do you pedagogy different books, also because if it's an ethical question, it's different. If it's a epistemological question, it's a different approach. So we do online courses for educators currently. Um, yeah, but I think the long term is there's nothing like specific in that sense, because so far it has grown organically. There have been schools and organizations that have been interested, and then we figure out how to work with them. Like currently, these online classes with this small group is in a very small school in Uttarakhand. So I think we've not gone through any like larger institutional body to grow this. But yeah,
Yeah, and something like this, like in principle, shouldn't be too institutionalized. It is a more sort of open-ended, generative sort of frame, which shouldn't have like too many constraints. Like it can't be determined too hard,
yeah.
right? No, this is really exciting, and I mean, I love children's literature, and I agree with you. It's philosophical. I mean, of course, I'm reading it as an quote unquote adult, but it's just so exciting to think with children, and also just generally, right? Think
Yeah.
uh, of more fundamental questions, and yeah, and I feel like this work is really exciting. Is there any sort of final thing that you would want to leave us with? Anything at all, right? That we may not have like touched upon in this conversation, and that you think is
Yeah.
important.
I don't know if there's one. There are many things, but so I would not say any one thing. Yeah, besides that, it has always felt like a very freeing space, and I would love to share more on, what are the kinds of stories and prompts, and how do we
Hmm.
pedagogue, because it's definitely a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
And even the people who are working within the online course, like week by week, we are looking at like how are there dialectic conversations within
Mm-hmm.
picture books, or how does philosophical fables,
Mm-hmm.
or the last one was we were seeing conceptual whimsy. So there's
Mm-hmm.
actually a lot of children's literature where there are characters that now are being swallowed, but they're making a home within a wolf's belly, or
Mm-hmm.
there's a character whose head falls off and it's like living as a head. So it's also very interesting how there's so much philosophical conversations in picture books, because they don't follow the rules of the world. Like the characters
Mm-hmm.
don't follow the rules of the world, and they do things in such counterfactual ways that we can
Mm-hmm.
really question the world. So I think I got sidetracked, but I always like to talk more on like how literature and philosophy come together in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a longer conversation, so I won't go into it.
Yeah, and I think there are sort of all those strands which this conversation opened
Yeah.
up. Like one, like the kind of literature uh, that opens up these questions to begin with, and
Yeah.
also what kinds of literature could we even produce, right?
Yeah.
Like keeping sort of the frame of philosophy with children in mind, as well as the sort of the more practical pedagogic aspects of it, and that's
Yeah.
a space of creativity, and there
Yeah.
are so
Yeah.
many possibilities in terms of prompts that you can come up with. But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
the conversation has definitely like given those suggestions and pointers, and at least the broad frames from which we can all begin thinking. So thank you,
Yeah.
Ria, for this wonderful conversation. It was lovely talking to you, and yeah, let's do more philosophy with children.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.